Across the United States, thousands are on death row for some of the worst crimes imaginable. Among these individuals, a particularly troubling group emerges: men who have killed their own family members. This video will explore the motivations and thoughts of these men who transformed their homes into crime scenes. Vincent Brothers. State: California. Date of execution: not defined. On July 6, 2003, Vincent took the lives of his wife, 39-year-old Joni Harper, their 3 children, Marquess, Lindsay, and Marshall, all under 4 years old, and Joni's mother, Ernestine Harper, age 70. They had been shot multiple times, and Joni had also been stabbed after death. Although the crime scene had been staged to look like a robbery, authorities confirmed that nothing was stolen. At the time of the murders, Vincent claimed he was visiting family in Ohio and North Carolina. However, investigators discovered his rental car had been driven thousands of miles, and forensic entomologists found insect species on the car's grill that only existed in California's Central Valley. He was arrested in April 2004. During his trial, prosecutors presented a pattern of domestic violence, infidelity, and controlling behavior. They argued that Vincent viewed his family as a financial burden, thereby making their deaths premeditated. In May 2007, he was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. On September 27, 2007, he was sentenced to death. As of now, Vincent remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. No execution date has been scheduled. Ronald Gene Simmons. State: Arkansas. Date of execution: June 25, 1990. Ronald Gene Simmons was convicted of carrying out one of the deadliest family massacres in American history. In 1 week, in December 1987, Simmons took the lives of 16 people, 14 of whom were his family members. In December 22nd, he shot and strangled his wife, Rebecca, and their son Gene Jr., as well as their 3-year-old granddaughter in their Dover home. He then took the lives of 4 more children on their way home from school. After hiding the bodies, he calmly waited for more relatives to arrive for the holidays. Over the next few days, he was responsible for the deaths of more children, grandchildren, and in-laws who visited the home. Some he killed by shooting, and others by strangulation or drowning. After wiping out his immediate family, Simmons drove to nearby Russellville on December 28th, where he shot 2 former co-workers and wounded several others in a shooting spree across 4 locations. Then he willingly turned himself in. During his trial, Simmons declined to appeal his sentence or fight his execution. He said he wanted to die. He was convicted of 16 counts of capital murder and sentenced to death. On June 25, 1990, Ronald Gene Simmons was executed by lethal injection at the Cummins Unit in Arkansas. He made no final statement and didn't request a last meal. Timothy Ray Jones, Jr. State: South Carolina. Date of execution: undefined. Timothy Ray Jones, Jr. was convicted of the brutal murders of his 5 children: Mara, Elias, Nacton, Gabriel, and Abigail, all under the age of 8. On August 28, 2014, Nacton passed away from exhaustion due to Jones's rigid disciplinary system of severe physical exercises. Stricken by panic, Jones proceeded to strangle his other 4 children, using his hands for Mara and Elias and a belt for Gabriel and Abigail. After the murders, he wrapped their bodies in bedsheets, placed them in his vehicle, and drove through several states over 9 days. He then disposed of their remains in rural Alabama. Jones was arrested on September 6, 2014, at a checkpoint in Mississippi. The police found bloodstains, bleach, and children's belongings in his vehicle. During his 2019 trial, Jones pleaded not guilty because of insanity. However, the jury rejected his defense. The judge found him guilty of 5 counts of murder. He was subsequently sentenced to death. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. John Hummel, State, Texas. Date of execution: June 30, 2021. John Hummel was convicted of taking the lives of his family members in December 2009. In their Kennedale, Texas home, Hummel brutally stabbed his pregnant wife, Joy Hummel, over 30 times. Afterwards, he used a baseball bat to beat his 5-year-old daughter, Jody Hummel, and his 57-year-old wheelchair-bound father-in-law, Clyde Bedford, to death. After committing the murders, Hummel set the house on fire to cover up the crimes. Hummel was convicted of capital murder for the deaths of his wife and father-in-law. He was not tried for his daughter's death. In 2011, a Tarrant County jury sentenced him to death. His execution was initially scheduled for March 18, 2020, but was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. On June 30, 2021, John Hummel was executed by lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. In his final statement, he expressed remorse, saying, "I truly regret killing my family. I am thankful for all the thoughts and prayers for my family over the last few days. I love each and every one of you." Stephen Dale Barbee. State, Texas. Date of execution, November 16, 2022. Stephen Dale Barbee was convicted of the 2005 lynching of his former girlfriend, Lisa Underwood, and her 7-year-old son, Jaden. Lisa was 7 months pregnant then and believed Barbee was the father. On February 19, 2005, Barbee suffocated Lisa and Jaden at their home and later buried their bodies in a shallow grave in Denton County. He was arrested and charged with capital murder. In February 2006, he was convicted and sentenced to death. After exhausting his appeals, Barbee was executed by lethal injection on November 16, 2022, at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. He was pronounced dead at 7:35 p.m. Jeffrey Glenn Hutchinson. State, Florida. Date of execution, May 1, 2025. Jeffrey Glenn Hutchinson, a Gulf War Army veteran, was convicted of the 1998 murders of his girlfriend, Renee Flaherty, and her 3 children, Jeffrey, Amanda, and Logan, all under the age of 9. On September 11th, Hutchinson shot each family member with a 12-gauge Mossberg shotgun in their Crestview family home. This was after he argued with Flaherty. He then called the emergency operator and confessed, "I just shot my family." Police arrived to find Hutchinson in the garage, still connected to the emergency operator, with the murder weapon on a kitchen counter and gunshot residue on his hands. In February 2001, Hutchinson was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder. He received a life sentence for Flaherty's murder and death sentences for each of the children's murders. Subsequent appeals, including claims of new exculpatory evidence, were denied by the Florida Supreme Court. On March 31, 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed Hutchinson's death warrant, scheduling his execution by lethal injection for May 1, 2025, at Florida State Prison near Stark. Donald Broadnax. State, Alabama. Date of execution, undefined. Donald Broadnax was convicted of multiple murders, including the 1996 killings of his wife, Jan, and her 4-year-old grandson, D'Angelo. He lured his wife and her grandson to his workplace in Birmingham, Alabama, where he brutally beat Jan to death with his fists and wooden sticks in the presence of D'Angelo. He then killed D'Angelo and placed both bodies in the trunk of Jan's car, which he later set on fire. In 1997, Broadnax was convicted on 4 counts of capital murder. Intentional murder of 2 or more persons under one scheme or course of conduct. Intentional murder by a person who has been convicted of another murder in the 20 years preceding the charged crime. Intentional murder committed during a first-degree kidnapping, and intentional murder of a victim less than 14 years of age. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, and the trial court imposed the sentence on September 12, 1997. As of April 2025, Donald Broadnax remains on death row in Alabama, with no execution date scheduled. Scott Peterson. State, California. Date of execution undefined. Scott Peterson was convicted of the 2002 murders of his wife, Lacey Peterson, who was 8 months pregnant, and their unborn son, Connor. On December 24, 2002, Lacey disappeared from their Modesto home in California. After several months, their bodies were found in the San Francisco Bay near a river where Peterson had claimed to be fishing on the day of her disappearance. In 2004, Peterson was convicted of first-degree murder for Lacey's death and second-degree murder for Connor's death. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. However, in 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Peterson's death sentence due to issues with jury selection during his trial. Despite this, nothing about his conviction for the murders was affected. As of 2022, Peterson was moved off death row. Right now, he is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole at San Quentin State Prison. Scott Peterson remains incarcerated, with no execution date scheduled. Christopher Lee Watts. State: Wisconsin, formerly Colorado. Date of execution undefined. Christopher Lee Watts was convicted for the 2018 murders of his pregnant wife, Shanann Watts, and their 2 daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, in Frederick, Colorado. On August 13, 2018, Watts strangled Shanann and smothered Bella and Celeste. He disposed of their bodies at his workplace, an oil field, with Shanann buried in a shallow grave and the children placed in oil tanks. At first, Watts was trying to play smart with authorities, but when he failed a polygraph test, he conceded and confessed to the murders. In November 2018, he pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including first-degree murder and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. Watts was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus additional years for other charges. He was spared the death penalty only because Shanann's family requested it. He is currently incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. Christian Michael Longo. State: Oregon. Date of execution undefined. Christian Longo was convicted of the 2001 murders of his wife, Mary Jane Baker Longo, and their 3 children, Zachary, Sadie, and Madison, all under 4 years old. In December 2001, their bodies were discovered in the Pacific Ocean near the Oregon coast. Longo ran to Mexico and assumed the identity of journalist Michael Finkel. On January 13, 2002, Longo was caught in Tulum, Mexico, and returned to the United States. In 2003, Longo was sentenced to death for the murders. But on December 13, 2022, Oregon Governor Kate Brown reduced the sentences of individuals on the state's death row, including Longo. Longo's life sentence was reduced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As of April this year, Christian Longo remains incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary. Preston Alton Strong. State: Arizona. Date of execution undefined. Preston Strong is a convicted mass murderer currently on death row in Arizona. On June 24, 2005, Strong ended the life of his friend Luis Rios, Rios's girlfriend Adrienne Heredia, and her 4 children, Andreas, Enrique, Inez, and Danny, all under the age of 13. The victims died from gunshot wounds and asphyxiation. In 2017, he was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld his death sentence 7 years later after reviewing his appeals. As of April this year, Preston Strong remains on death row at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, with no execution date scheduled. Ronnie O'Neill III. State: Florida. Date of execution undefined. Ronnie O'Neill III was convicted for the 2018 murders of his ex-girlfriend, Kenyatta Barron, and their 9-year-old daughter, Ron Nevaeh O'Neill, as well as the attempted murder of their 8-year-old son, Ronnie O'Neill IV, in Riverview, Florida. The murders took place on March 18, 2018. Around 11:43 p.m., O'Neill shot Barron and attacked Ron Nevea with a hatchet, resulting in their deaths. Their son, Ronnie IV, was stabbed but survived and later testified against his father. He also set their home on fire before fleeing the scene. O'Neill represented himself during the trial. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, 1 count of arson, and 1 count of resisting a law enforcement officer. On July 23, 2021, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus 90 years. Ronnie O'Neill III remains incarcerated at the Blackwater River Correctional Facility in Milton, Santa Rosa County, Florida, serving his sentence. Abel Clemens, State, Virginia, now West Virginia. Date of execution, 1806. Abel Clemens was a farmer who took his wife's and 8 children's lives on November 10, 1805. He used an axe to lynch his pregnant wife, Barbara Carpenter Clemens, and their 8 children, all between the ages of infancy to age 12. The victims were asleep in their separate beds within the same room when they were attacked. Clemens struck the victims with an axe to their heads, causing their immediate death. Clemens then went into hiding on a cliffside near Clarksburg. He turned himself in after a few days. In 1806, Clemens was convicted and executed by hanging. George Jefferson Hassell. State, Texas. Date of execution, February 10, 1928. George Jefferson Hassell was a serial killer who murdered his wife and 8 stepchildren in Fowle in 1926. On December 5th, he killed his wife Susan and her 8 children, all between the ages of 1 and 21. He used a ball-peen hammer, straight razor, shotgun, and axe. He then kept their bodies in a root cellar, patiently awaiting the return of his eldest stepson, Alton, who was working in New Mexico. Hassell was caught when he attempted to sell his family's properties. He confessed to the crimes, including a similar incident in 1917, where he killed his common-law wife and 3 adopted children in California. Hassell was convicted and executed by electrocution on February 10, 1928. He is the 37th person to be executed in Texas. Ronald Lee Haskell. State, Texas. Date of execution, undefined. Ronald Lee Haskell is currently on death row in Texas for the 2014 murders of 6 members of his former sister-in-law's family. On July 9, 2014, he walked into the home of his former sister-in-law, Katie Stay, and tied up the family members, after which he executed them. The sole survivor, 15-year-old Cassidy Stay, pretended to be dead and later provided crucial testimony. Haskell was convicted of 6 counts of capital murder. In September 2019, a jury found him guilty, and in October 2019, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. As of April this year, he remains on death row at the Allen B. Polunsky Unit near Livingston, Texas, awaiting execution. Misak Damas. State, Florida. Date of execution, undefined. Misak Damas is convicted of the 2009 murders of his wife and 5 children in Collier County, Florida. Between September 17 and 18, he used a fillet knife to kill his wife, 32-year-old Guerline Dieu Damas, their 5 children. Damas slit the victim's throat in their Naples townhouse. After the murders, he traveled to Miami International Airport and flew to Port-au-Prince, Haiti. He was caught by the U.S. Marshals in Haiti on September 23, 2009, and returned to Florida. In September 2017, Damas pleaded guilty to all 6 counts of first-degree murder. In October 2017, he was sentenced to death by Collier Circuit Judge Christine H. Grider. Amos remains incarcerated on death row at the Florida State Prison, awaiting execution. His execution date has not been scheduled. George Emil Banks. State, Pennsylvania. Date of execution, undefined. George Emil Banks is a former prison guard convicted of the 1982 shooting spree that resulted in the deaths of 13 individuals, including 5 of his own children, in Wilkes-Barre and Jenkins Township, Pennsylvania. On September 25, 1982, Banks embarked on a shooting spree that began in his residence on Schoolhouse Lane, where he killed 8 individuals, including 3 women, all mothers of his children, and 5 children, 4 of whom were his own. He then targeted 2 men, Jimmy Olsen and Ray Hall Jr., fatally shooting Hall and injuring Olsen. Banks continued his assault at Heather Highlands Mobile Home Park, where he murdered his former girlfriend, their son, her mother, and her nephew. Banks was convicted of 12 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 1983. However, his execution was postponed due to concerns regarding his mental competency. Banks remains incarcerated at a state correctional institution in Pennsylvania. His execution date has not been scheduled, and he continues to appeal his conviction and sentence. Marcus DeLon Wesson, State, California. Date of execution undefined. Marcus Wesson is a mass murderer convicted of killing 9 of his children and grandchildren in Fresno, California, in 2004. On March 12, 2004, Fresno police responded to a child custody dispute involving Marcus Wesson and 2 of his former common-law wives, who were also his nieces. Upon entering Wesson's residence, authorities discovered 9 bodies, including 2 of his daughters and 7 of their children, all fatally shot through the eye. The victims were found in a bedroom filled with antique coffins. In June 2005, after a trial, Wesson was convicted of 9 counts of first-degree murder and 14 counts of crimes, including assaults and molestation of his daughters and nieces. The jury sentenced him to death. Marcus Wesson, now 78 years old, remains incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison in California, awaiting execution. Daryl Keith Holton, State, Tennessee. Date of execution, September 12, 2007. On November 30, 1997, Daryl Keith Holton drove to his uncle's auto repair shop in Shelbyville, Tennessee, with his 4 children, 3 sons and a stepdaughter. There, in cold blood, he used a semi-automatic rifle to execute the children one by one. Stephen, Brent, Eric, and Kayla, all under the age of 12. The murders were reportedly premeditated. Holton was found guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. In a rare legal move, he waived his appeals and chose to be executed by electrocution, even though lethal injection was the default method in Tennessee. This made him the first person executed by the electric chair in Tennessee in 47 years. Mental health professionals debated his competency, with some arguing he had untreated mental illness. Still, Holton consistently insisted he was sane and deserved to die for his crimes. Before his execution, Holton declined a special last meal and simply asked for a soft drink. He showed no emotion as he was strapped into the electric chair. At 1:25 a.m. on September 12, 2007, the sentence was carried out. Joseph Edward Corcoran, State, Indiana. Date of execution, December 18, 2024. Joseph Edward Corcoran was a convicted murderer who was executed for a 1997 quadruple homicide in Fort Wayne, Indiana. On July 26, 1997, Corcoran fatally shot 4 men in his home. His brother, 30-year-old James Corcoran, his sister's fiancé, 32-year-old Robert Scott Turner, and 2 friends, 30-year-old Timothy G. Bricker and 30-year-old Douglas A. Stillwell. Corcoran was convicted of the murders in 1999 and was sentenced to death. Throughout his incarceration, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia by multiple medical professionals, with symptoms including hallucinations and delusions. After spending over 25 years on death row, Corcoran was executed by lethal injection on December 18, 2024, at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. He was pronounced dead at 12:44 a.m. CST. This was Indiana's first execution since 2009. Michael Wayne Jones, Jr. to State, Florida. Date of execution undefined. Michael Wayne Jones Jr. was convicted of the brutal murders of his wife, Cassie Jones, and their 4 children, Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayanna, all under the age of 10. It happened in the summer of 2019. Casey and her children had been missing for weeks in Marion County, Florida, raising concern in many places. Jones was leaving Florida when his car crashed in Georgia. Inside the car, authorities discovered the decaying body of Cassie Jones. He was arrested immediately. Following his arrest, Jones confessed and led authorities to the location of the children's bodies, which he had hidden in a wooded area nearby. He admitted to killing his wife during a domestic dispute, and then, over the following days, murdering each of the children in the family home. In 2022, he pled guilty to all 5 murders. Jones was sentenced to death in April the following year. He received a life sentence without parole for the second-degree murder of his wife. His lawyers presented arguments citing that he had mental health issues, but the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. Michael Wayne Jones, Jr. remains on death row. His execution date has not been scheduled, and his case is pending appeal before the Florida Supreme Court. Abel R. Ochoa, State, Texas. Date of execution, February 6, 2020. Abel R. Ochoa was convicted for the 2002 murders of his wife, Cecilia, their 2 daughters, 7-year-old Crystal and 9-month-old Anahi, his father-in-law, 56-year-old Bartolo Alviso, and his sister-in-law, 20-year-old Jacqueline Saleh, in Dallas, Texas. On August 4, 2002, while under the influence of crack cocaine, Ochoa fatally shot these family members in his home. At trial, defense attorneys argued that his actions were influenced by his substance-induced state, suggesting a lack of intent. However, the jury convicted him of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. After spending nearly 18 years on death row, 47-year-old Ochoa was executed by lethal injection on February 6, 2020. In his final statement, he expressed remorse, apologizing to his in-laws for the pain caused and thanking them for their forgiveness. Ochoa's execution was the second in Texas in 2020 and the third in the United States that year. Charles Chase Merritt, State, California. Date of execution, undefined. Charles Chase Merritt, a former business associate of Joseph McStay, was convicted for the 2010 murders of the McStay family. Joseph, 40, Summer, 43, Gianni, 4, and Joseph Jr., 3. The family disappeared from their Fallbrook, California, home, and their remains were discovered in the Mojave Desert in 2013. In 2014, Merritt was arrested and charged with the murders. The trial commenced in January 2019, with Merritt maintaining his innocence. On June 10, 2019, the jury convicted him on 4 counts of first-degree murder. On January 21, 2020, he was sentenced to death by San Bernardino Superior Court Judge Michael Smith. Charles Merritt is currently awaiting execution at San Quentin State Prison in California. If you like the way we create videos and you want us to bring more cases like this to light, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives.